The NCAA tournament starts today. By the time we post this video, it'll have already started. Louisville, Creighton kicking it off. That game will be underway by the time we post this. But since college basketball is on the mind, Tony, you wrote over on Gophers on SI about the Gophers job being one of, or is, if it is, one of the hardest in the country, because that has been the talk since the departure of Ben Johnson, since the program parted ways with him. Now with Niko Medved presumably taking over once Colorado State is bounced from the tournament. He has the tough task, if you will, of turning this program around. So let's get into it. Let's get into the premise of this article. Is Minnesota really one of the hardest jobs in the country, Tony?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Just in college sports discourse in general, people talk about which jobs are great, which jobs stink, and there's a lot about Minnesota that makes it a challenging job to coach men's basketball at the school. I personally think the biggest issue is the location in a major city with a lot of stuff to compete against. And it makes it really challenging because if you look at these SEC programs and some of the Big Ten programs, the reason they have so much NIL is because it's the only show in town. And these alumni and boosters, it's real easy to invest in a program that everyone's focused on. Everyone's going to love SEC football, SEC basketball because it's the only thing in those cities, and it's a true college town. Minnesota's not a college town, which makes it a hard job. With that being said, there's plenty of other programs that aren't in college towns that have great success in college basketball. In the story we mentioned St. John's this year. It's obviously a little bit easier when you have a Hall of Fame head coach,
That helps, yeah.
But they had their fan base and boosters took basketball seriously. Since the 90s, they were kind of in the basement of the Big East. In my life, St. John's was nothing. And then their boosters are like, okay, we're St. John's. We have a lot of money. Let's be St. John's. And they took basketball seriously. Let's go.
There it is. Yep.
And they go out and invest all this money. And Houston, another school, they weren't anything since they had the Fly Slamma Jamma with Hakeem Olajuwon and all these other players back
Drexler, baby.
Yeah. And then they took basketball seriously. Let's go hire Kelvin Sampson, who was a relatively proven head coach at multiple stops, and let's take basketball seriously. Let's invest some money. And we mentioned Maryland, a little different situation being in the Big Ten, but Minnesota in the 90s, they were a good program with Clem Haskins. They made the Final Four. They were routinely in the tournament. And there are plenty of Gophers basketball fans that want to relive those days. And that's what they need to do. They need to take basketball seriously. They haven't been doing that for the past 2 decades. And if they want to be a consistent program, that's what they have to do. And I think that's what makes the job challenging, but also what makes it a good job, because it's a sleeping giant, so to speak, that it has the potential to get back to that level. But there's so many people that point out everything that's wrong with it, which is a big reason why they've struggled the last 2 decades.
Well, I think there's 2 ways you can approach this if you're Minnesota. 1, you can build it, or 2, you can buy it. So Richard Pitino went on KFan this week, and he made some really good points, right? Like, a new head coach has to be enthusiastic. They have to have the ability to convince local millionaires, billionaires, big companies, Fortune 500. We know Minnesota, the Twin Cities, is loaded with those types of people and businesses. Convince them to write checks to Gophers basketball. Nobody's going to do that, though, if the players aren't up to par and the product on the court isn't up to par. So I think the first thing the Gophers have to do is find a coach who can build something. Why is Yale always dangerous in the NCAA tournament? Why is Utah State a feared 10 seed this year? Why? Because Utah State plays a hell of a zone defense that makes them unique. It's what Syracuse used to do under Jim Boeheim. They played a brand of basketball. Yale plays a brand of basketball that is really difficult to play against. Look at St. Thomas, right across the freaking river here in Minnesota. They play a brand of basketball that is tough to play against. It's well coached. Minnesota has not had that. They didn't have it under Richard Pitino. They didn't have it under Dan Munson. They didn't have it under Ben Johnson. They have not had it over decades. And that's not good enough. So they have to find a coach who can take players and put them in a position to succeed, whether they're Yale level players or whether they're Maryland level players or Duke level players. You have to have a coach that can actually take those guys and teach them a system that's going to be dangerous to play against. When you're dangerous, you can win games. When you win games, you get to the tournament. When you get to the tournament, you get recruits. You get transfer portal commitments. And then the money comes. So you got to build it so you can buy it. It's not a complicated process. And if Mark Coyle would like some help, my number is 61. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, just call me. Anybody knows this. This isn't rocket science. And they've made it very difficult to buy into this program. So changes have to be made, and it's time to get it right. No more excuses.
Okay, so when you talk about a coach who can build a program, who can kind of start building this out, we've seen that sort of. I mean, we've seen that come to a little bit of fruition with PJ Fleck and the Gophers building up something, and they've gotten some investment over the past handful of years since the NIL took shape, and they've certainly been able to keep in their own home stars because of the NIL that they have, and that's probably a good amount of credit to what PJ Fleck's able to do. We talk about the Gophers basketball program, and I mentioned it right off the top. It seems like Niko Medved pretty much has a contract ready to sign once Colorado State's bound from the tournament. Is he that guy for this program, Tony?
Yeah, I think step one to getting to the level they need to be is changing the perception of the program. Everyone loves to talk about the in-state recruits, and especially in the mid 2010s with Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren, Trey Jones,
Tyus Jones, yeah.
Yeah. They all went to programs that took basketball seriously. It's just hard. I think that was the main reason why they didn't really even consider the Gophers. It's like, I'm this 5-star talent. Why would I go to a school that really doesn't care about basketball? So
Yeah.
they need to prove they care about basketball. And it is hard because there is a lot of stuff going on at Minnesota. But PJ Fleck changed the perception of Gophers football. That's why at the Gophers Pro Day, there's the Vikings head coach. There's all these big names there watching the Pro Day. They're producing NFL talent every year. They're not Ohio State or Michigan, and the basketball team's never going to be the top program in the Big Ten, but they're respected, and other programs across the conference, across the country, respect Gophers football, which wasn't the case for decades and decades. And the basketball team's in a similar place. I am a big fan of the Medved decision if they opt to go in that direction, because I think he immediately will raise the floor. Since he's been a head coach, I don't think any of his teams have been bad. And Ben Johnson had 2 teams that were just flat out bad, and a third team that was so up and down this year. And then last year they were pretty good. But Medved's been a coach for 12 years, I think, and none of his teams have bottomed out. And a lot of the Gophers teams in recent years have bottomed out. And I think that's what they need to avoid, because bottoming out is what really hurts your perception. Because uh, even we see in like pro sports a little bit, it's like teams like the Jaguars and the Browns, like people just think they're kind of the dumpster fire in the NFL. And I think the Gophers right now are kind of viewed as the dumpster fire in the Big Ten, because they haven't been in the tournament in 6 years, and they just need to be a team that people are like, oh man, we got to go play at the barn. That's always a tough game. And I just don't think they've had that. And I think Medved will provide that. And then once you get to that level, then you can start taking the next step, because this isn't going to be an overnight rebuild where he comes in and then they're just in the tournament every year. I think he's at a level of coach. Like, there's so much that will happen between now and then that the roster has a big impact in this, but he's at a level of coach that I do think he could compete year one if they have that type of roster. But uh, it it's not going to happen overnight, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to change. And the Gophers is a tough job; it's not an easy job. But I think Medved's the guy to fix it.
Joe, is Medved the guy for this program? The guy that can do the things that you talked about?
I think so, and I trust the voices of respected coaches like Richard Pitino, who in that really good interview on KFAN with Dan Barrero, he said Medved is as consistent as they come. He's very enthusiastic. He's a winner on the recruiting trail, and he knows how to coach basketball. So If you want to bring fans in, you have to win, obviously, but you also have to be exciting. People want to watch an exciting brand of basketball, and that hasn't existed in Minnesota for God knows since when. Since Bobby Jackson was in his 20s, and now he's 52. So that's a problem. But I think Medved plays a style of where he gets guys up and down in transition, and they shoot a lot of threes. And like Patino said, he's put 3 or 4 guys in the NBA in his short time at Colorado State. Neek Clifford is going to be the next, probably a first-round pick, and everybody's going to be watching him when Colorado State takes on Memphis on Friday in the first round. So, yeah, I mean, I think he would have a chance to be the guy. And everybody's seen his post-game comments and post-game interviews and how excited he is with his team. There's something about that enthusiasm that is contagious. Ben Johnson, I don't want to knock him for personality, but he was just kind of basketball, and that's fine. You can be just basketball, but I don't think you can be just basketball if part of your job is to convince rich people to write you checks so you can build a roster that is requisite of competing at a Power 5 level. So if you don't want to get picked dead last in the Big Ten, you got to be more than just basketball. And I don't even think Ben Johnson on a basketball level brought it to the level he needed to. I've talked about this. I thought you try to make Lukai Patterson, Cam Christie, you're going to fail. And I think that's what he tried to do. So I think Niko Medved's the opposite, where he will put players in positions to maximize their skills. Yeah, I think he'd have a shot to do that here at Minnesota for sure.
Sticking with the Niko Medved topic before I move on to my next question for you guys, if he is the guy that does get hired, which all signs continue to point to that being the case, how long is the turnaround? If there is a turnaround, I mean, that's the best hope for Gophers fans, is that Niko Medved is able to turn this thing around and make this team competitive and get them back into the tournament. What kind of a turnaround timeline are we looking at, Tony?
Let me say this real quick. Tony wrote about this, and he nailed it, because the Gophers, Medved, whoever the coach is, they literally may have to find 15 new scholarship players. It's possible that nobody is back. And that, if you want to talk about a runway before liftoff, oh my God, next year could be a total disaster. And then you put the pieces together after that. So in my opinion, real briefly, Tony, you can expand on this, but I think it's going to be definitely 2 years, if not 3 or 4.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at a program like St. John's, obviously they're doing well because Richard Pitino might be one of the best coaches to ever coach basketball, but he's like selling the job. He knew that St. John's is one of the best jobs in the country, and he's proving that. And he is selling this message that St. John's is awesome and all this stuff, and it's one of the best brands in college basketball. And as someone in my 20s, I did not see that at all in my life. It just kind of seemed like they were in the basement of the Big East. And Niko Medved's going to need to do that, I think, with Minnesota a little bit, because Joe mentioned how selling the program's a big thing. And Ben Johnson, right when he was hired, he did a couple small things that I thought pointed in that direction, but he kind of lost that enthusiasm almost immediately, which I think is a big reason why he struggled. And in his comments before games and after games, it seemed like he was kind of just annoyed that his team the whole time.
He was very defensive, very defensive.
Yeah. And that's something that Medved or whoever the next coach is going to need to flip and be like, yes, my team's awesome. All 15 of these guys are awesome, and we're going to go into your building and beat you. You're going to come into our building. We're going to beat you. That's something that Ben Johnson just never had. And as it comes from a roster perspective, I think we've seen in college basketball that you can have a quick turnaround. But there's so many variables right now. It's impossible to tell what the Gophers roster would look like if they keep, let's say, Isaac Osama, maybe another scholarship player, bring in 12, 13 new guys. They could be competitive next year, but we have no idea who those 12, 13 guys are. So until we get to that point, it's just so many just ifs and buts for but personally, if it is a couple of the Colorado State guys, maybe you bring in 1, 2 big name transfers. I think they could be frisky next year. I'm just a big Medved fan, but
Well,
I don't know. It's just so hard to project at this
yeah,
point.
and they're gonna, another thing, they're gonna have money with the rev share coming into these conferences. So the difference between what Indiana can pay its roster compared to what Minnesota, it won't be 5 times the amount anymore. It'll be twice the amount. They'll still have an advantage, but the gap will be narrowed. So Minnesota's going to have more money to work with to compete for some more marquee talent. But then again, so will every other team. So the floor definitely gets raised with Medved. It's assisted and maybe boosted even higher with the rev share. But then you got to go out and recruit and convince guys that they're going to come into a winning situation. And I think Medved has a track record where he could actually tell recruits that and they would believe it. Tell guys in the portal that and they would believe it. Get Nate Clifford on the phone and be like, yeah, this is what this coach did for me. That's
Yeah.
the kind of thing. Get David
4
Roddy
year
on the phone.
development.
Yeah, get David Roddy, the Breck kid, on the phone
Yeah.
and say, look what he did for me. I'm in the NBA now. I may not be a household name, but,
He was a first rounder.
he was a first round pick. Very talented, physical player. So he can do it. He certainly can. Maybe it isn't 3 years or 4 years. Maybe it is 1 or 2 years before the Gophers are, looking at a spot in the top 10 of the Big Ten tournament, and then at least on the bubble in year 1 or year 2 for the NCAA tournament, which would be a boost from where this Gophers team has been under Ben Johnson.
So let me ask you guys this, because Tony, you've mentioned this a couple times about taking basketball seriously, and we've seen football be taken seriously. We know hockey there, both men's and women's, is taken very seriously at the University of Minnesota. How many programs, and I don't mean to ask this question as a way to let Mark Coyle off the hook here for how basketball has been treated over the past couple years, how many programs can one organization or one university take seriously? Because football is going to be very, very expensive. Hockey with the roster sizes is going to be expensive, especially with the way they take it seriously here in Minnesota. Can the Gophers afford to take basketball seriously and not take away from football or hockey?
Yeah, the thing that I get frustrated with in my Twitter bubble of people that is just not indicative of the entire fan base, but it's people saying that Ben Johnson didn't succeed because didn't have NIL. Well, that is true. Some of that does go on the head coach. What we've talked about, you have to sell yourself and you have to sell the program. And I think Medved has proven that he can do that and he can get people excited. If you sell out the barn, you're going to have more money into the program. You're going to get more money to buy players, hypothetically, so to speak, not really buy players, but you know what I mean. And it just, that's what generates the excitement is you need people to start caring about Gophers basketball. And there's so much talk about the barn and what it needs to be changed and all this stuff. And like at the end of the day, you just have to win games. It's really not that complicated. You just got to put the ball in the hoop and more times than the other team. But
Well, dude, look at Richard Pitino. We can use him again. He loses the Toppin kid, who is was he the Big 12 player of the year or SEC player of the year? Whatever. No, not SEC, but Big 12 player of the year.
Yeah, third team All-American.
Away from New Mexico. He was on Pitino's roster last year. John Tonji had committed to Pitino for a day and then ended up magically over at Wisconsin because money talks. We all know that's true. And he still has an All-American point guard in Donovan Dent, a dynamite rebounder in Nelly Jr. Joseph, and a second year in a row with 26 wins. They don't have as much money at New Mexico, and Pitino flat out said it, as Minnesota. How is he winning? That rosters, you can't buy a roster at New Mexico like you can at Minnesota, even before the rev share. So you can't tell me right now that coaching isn't the biggest factor in all of this in terms of being competitive. Maybe Ben Johnson's just not a great head coach, or he just wasn't ready for this level. I think that's just facts. Pitino was at Florida Atlantic or whatever before he got to Minnesota. He had an opportunity to learn the ropes at a lower level. Got to Minnesota, got his 8 years in, got the rug pulled out from underneath him because the expectations, which were low, were not met. And then he goes to New Mexico, where it's a little bit easier of a playing field in the Mountain West. But that team would have kicked the crap out of the Gophers this year. Everybody would agree on that. So it's all about coaching. It just is.
Yeah. Because I would – one thing I've pushed back on a lot this offseason is people saying that Ben Johnson didn't have any talent to work with. He had Jamison Battle, who's in the NBA, Cam Christie, who was second-round pick, Dawson Garcia, McDonald's All-American.
Yeah, last year's roster was super talented.
Yeah, and if you talk about last year's roster compared to this year's roster, last year they had a point guard from Howard. This year Howard's in one of the worst conferences in the country. This year they went out and got a point guard from Charlotte in the American Athletic Conference, solid mid-major conference. You could argue on paper, Lakai Patterson expected to be better than Elijah Hawkins. And then you return Mike Mitchell, and then at the 3, you have Femi Odekale, who's 24 compared to 18-year-old Cam Christie. And then you return Dawson Garcia, and then you have 25-year-old Parker Fox. And then you bring off the nation's second or third leading rebounder off the bench. And acting like that's a YMCA team is just ridiculous to me. Maybe he just wasn't a good coach.
I mean, it kind of adds up. Great guy, not ready for that level. And hey, you put me in that coaching position, I'm gonna fail too. But I ain't qualified.
I agree. Yeah,
I ain't qualified.
But he is a head coach at a public university. He's gonna get a little criticism.
You're going to get ripped if you don't win at the U of M, whether the expectations are low or not. What I like about all of this right now is that it seems like the bar is being raised. You know, it's not at the level of Texas where they fire the head coach after 3 years and 3 NCAA tournaments. That's a little aggressive. That's going to be too aggressive here at Minnesota, but that's what you should strive to be if you're a program, right? You have expectations to not just make the tournament, but make a run in the tournament. That's big time college sports. This is big business now, ladies and gentlemen. This is not, prep school. We're going to go there and everybody gets a blue ribbon. No. There are no moral victories anymore in college sports, not in the Big Ten. You got to bring it, man. And I think the Gophers are actually raising the expectations. They're saying all the right things. You know, the leash goes from 8 years of underachieving with Pitino to 4 years with Ben Johnson. And now whoever comes in, Niko Medved, I don't know what that leash is, but it's probably not any longer than 4 years if you're going to struggle like that. So that's good. Minnesotans should be celebrating that if you're among the crowd that's been begging to raise the expectations and stop settling for rivalry wins. You know, hey, we beat Wisconsin, we beat Iowa. Let's give this guy a 5-year extension. Are you kidding me?
Let's storm the court for beating a top 10 team.
Have some self-respect and pride. You know, act like you've been there. I know they haven't, but act like you've been there before. It's embarrassing, man. It's like the football team. It's like, let's be careful too how we address this stuff. Because, in all of this talk about branding and how great PJ Fleck has been, I mean, yeah, you're putting guys in the NFL, but you're nowhere near that Big Ten championship game. You're nowhere near the college football playoff. So even there, even though he's bringing in the money and putting guys in the NFL, the product is still very sketchy at times. And the expectations seem to be that if you beat Wisconsin and Iowa, that you're just safe. I don't like that. I hate that. I think you need to
he has raised the floor.
If the floor is raised, yeah,
isn't good enough.
The ceiling's not any higher. No, he's squished it a little bit. Yeah, that's nice.
He's raised it a win or two. People expect, I think, 8 wins now. And in the early 2000s, it was just if you get to a bowl game, that's impressive.
Yeah, I know, but we're tired of mayo. Okay, we need something a little more.
We need some roses.
We need some roses, baby. There you go.
Let's transition this conversation since it's at the time of recording 4 minutes until tip-off between Louisville and Creighton for the opening game of the NCAA tournament. Let's get your brackets. Let's discuss these. Who you guys got in your Final Four? Because I know we were talking about this beforehand. You guys were giving me a little stick for who I had in my Final Four, so I'll start off with you guys. Tony, let's start with you.
There's a lot of pressure on Tony because he is the Gophers
Yeah, he's the
guy
basketball
for us.
guy.
It's like
Yeah.
he is the college guy. I can
Yeah,
get
I
away
get
with
pressure from my entire family and all of my friends. So just
Yep.
bring
Well,
it
let's
on.
add that pressure. Let's get it. Let's
Yeah.
get it from the Bring Me the Sports YouTube audience here.
Yeah, so my Final Four, I got Michigan State, Texas Tech, Duke, and Gonzaga.
Oh my God, that's so bad.
I think the South region is pretty interesting. I have a feeling Auburn's going to get picked off, and in March, I like to just trust coaches, and Tom Izzo is really easy to trust. In the East region, I think I'd be pretty surprised if it wasn't Duke. I think they got a pretty good draw overall, and I don't really trust many of those teams other than Duke. And then in the West, uh, I don't have any upsets in the first round really there, but Florida's been looking really good. Speaking of Elijah Hawkins, Texas Tech looks good, so I'm going with the Red Raiders. And then in the Midwest, I think there could be a lot of upsets. Gonzaga over Houston's a really trendy pick right now, and I like that one. I've always been a Gonzaga fan. I like Mark Few. And then overall, the one upset I'm calling in the first round is Lipscomb over Iowa State. But I got Duke over Michigan State in the final. Cooper Flag lives up to the hype.
So how many first round double-digit seeds do you have advancing?
All right, let's see here.
I'll go through it with you. Let's go through the South. I've got North Carolina beating Ole Miss.
I like that. I totally see that happen.
But I
think they're favored to win.
Yeah, no, they look so good, and they've rattled off like 9 of 11, and I think they have the whole nation against them, so I think they're motivated.
Yeah, I don't think
I
anyone's
actually have them in
arguing
my Elite Eight, but
I don't think anyone's arguing they're a good team. It's just they didn't deserve to be in.
yeah, no, that's kind of it. Yeah, I've got them in my Elite Eight though, but that's the only in the South. That's the only double-digit seed I have advancing. I actually have Creighton and North Carolina in the Elite Eight, so that would be a 9 and an 11 seed, which is pretty crazy.
It happens.
What's your Final Four look like, Joe?
I've got Creighton in the Final Four, along with St. John's on the left side of the bracket, and then I have Duke and Georgia on the right side of the bracket. I'm big on St. John's over Duke in the national championship game. I make my picks based on YouTube highlights, and I love how St. John's looks. They look nasty, man, and I've seen some of their games this year. They're able to defend and great guard play, and they have some ferocity and dog down in the paint. So I really like that combination. Duke's a monster, obviously, and if Cooper Flag his ankle's good, like a lot of people think it is, he may miss the first game, but after that, they're going to be an absolute juggernaut, and I love their draw. Creighton's really risky because they could get bounced by Louisville in the first round, and then they'd have to go through Auburn, so it's a super tough draw for them to go deep. But again, their YouTube highlights say they're very good. And then the team I love the most in this whole tournament is Georgia. They've got a lottery pick in Asa Newell. They've got good guards. They have good depth. They have good size. They haven't been here in a long time. I don't think they've been in the tournament for years, but I don't think they've won a tournament game for maybe 2 decades. It's been a really long time. But I hate Gonzaga. I don't think they're very good this year. Georgia, they've beaten St. John's. They lost to 1 by Auburn on a bad call at the end of the game. They beat Kentucky. They've beaten who else did they beat?
Tennessee, I think.
They beat Florida. Yeah, they beat Florida. They probably beat Tennessee too. They're very good. At one point they won 9 of 11 games, and then at another point they lost 9 of 10. So they're streaky. But if they're rolling and they have all the talent, they're a team that can win 6 games in a row if they had to. So, and they've proven to beat the best teams in the country. So, getting through Houston in the second round, I love that. The other big upsets I have are High Point in the first round. I've got Xavier beating Illinois. Everyone's high on Illinois. I'm not seeing it. Utah State. I like Utah State over UCLA. That's going to be a weird, slow game, and I think Utah State's defense will come through. God, I sound like a college basketball expert, even though I've watched like 3 of these teams all season long.
I
But
think the
this
question
is what YouTube highlights gives you. It gives you the opportunity to sound like a goddamn genius.
I think the question that everybody who watches these shows on a daily basis is wondering, Will.
And who are
Is
those?
wondering,
Because I don't think
wondering,
those
Joe,
people exist. But
how far do you have Will Wade's McNeese State going in the
oh
tournament?
man, they're not going to win. He's packed his bags for NC State. They're not even going to win a game.
They're out.
I watched some of their highlights too, and I was like, who are all these white guys? And I'm like, these guys aren't going to go very far. So that's just not going to happen.
That's
so
what the Chiefs said about the Eagles secondary, and look how that played out for them.
Well, Cooper DeJean isn't playing in this one, so sorry, McNeese. You're running into a really good Clemson team that went to the Elite Eight last year and is going to go to the Sweet 16 this year. So there you have it.
I like it. I'm looking forward to it. I can already feel Tony's attention slipping towards the TV as the tournament is about to be underway. So
yes.
I'll let you go. I'll let us go, and I'll get to editing this video and posting it here shortly on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Do hit subscribe. Does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new video here. Greatly appreciate that, and greatly appreciate you guys stopping by to talk about this topic. We'll talk about another topic tomorrow across
Gonzagas.
Gonzagas. Talk to you then.